The chamber of the Galactic Council rose like a mountain of glass and stone, layered in rings that stretched up toward a ceiling lit by cool white crystals. The walls hummed faintly with translation fields. Flags of 100 worlds hung motionless in the sterile air. Delegates glittered in ceremonial robes, scales, feathers, and polished plates catching the cold light. It should have felt solemn. Instead, it sounded like a tavern before a storm. Low laughter, thumps of desk claws, the rustle of smug bodies settling in to enjoy a show. At the center circle sat the human ambassador. He wore no jewels, no plumes, no armor. A plain dark suit, a simple silver pin on the lapel, hands folded loosely on the desk, back straight but relaxed. He looked like a man listening to quiet music only he could hear. Around him the mockery warmed up. A Creel delegate clicked his mandibles in a rhythm meant to insult. "Observe the tame species," he hissed, the translator rendering his voice with a slick, oily brightness. "See how it sits. See how it smiles. It has no fangs. It has no barbs. It has no reach." Laughter rolled over the benches. A feathered matron flared bright wings and tittered. They brought soft-spoken words instead of ships. A plated beast from the Rift Worlds thumped his tail. "If not for treaties, we would keep them as descents in our museums. They are polite enough to point at the exhibits." The speaker wrapped his staff once in a gesture that signaled order but not respect, a ritual tap that allowed the mockery to continue while pretending to curb it. The human looked up at the speaker with pleasant eyes, then lowered his gaze again to the tabletop. He smiled a touch more, as if he had thought of an old joke and kept it carefully to himself. A younger delegate, a thin, translucent being who preferred to speak through scent, vented a puff of citrus scorn. The translator created words where alien perfume hung. They ask for seats, not thrones. They offer help, not demands. They call this peace. We call it a lack. Another wave of chuckles. Soft seats squeaked. Some delegates leaned forward like spectators at a sport. Others exchanged wagers, literal credit slips changing hands, the bet terms glimmering in augmented overlays. How long until the human asks for mercy? When will he snap? Will he cry? The humans, the joke went, always cried and always forgave. The human did not cry. He rearranged a piece of paper until its edges aligned with the desk seam. He looked, for a heartbeat, at the gallery high above, the press boxes, the student benches, the board aides, and one by one the board aides realized they were being watched and straightened their posture without knowing why. In the second ring, an older delegate with glassy eyes and ash-colored skin stopped smiling. He had lived long enough to hear old songs in new laughter. He shifted in his seat and whispered to the being beside him, "They are pushing too far." The reply came lazy, "It is entertainment." "Is it?" the elder murmured, eyes on the human's hands. "Entertainment ends when the music stops." The creel thumped again, louder, eager to be chief among children. "Ambassador," he clicked. "Tell us how your armies fare in. What do you call them? Restorations? When you rebuild ruins others make. Do your troops carry shovels instead of guns?" More laughter. The human's smile did not fade. He nodded once to the creel, a courteous tilt that said, "Yes, I heard you." He did not answer. A new voice joined the chorus, a silver-scaled diplomat who liked to hear himself purr. "Your species worships courtesy, yes? Please teach us. When a predator bites you, how many times do you bow before you bleed?" The human adjusted his cuff, the small motion neat and almost absent-minded. His wrist showed a faint line of scar. Cameras in the gallery lenses caught it and zoomed, and for a few watchers the room felt, inexplicably, colder. A trio of junior delegates from peripheral worlds shouted stage questions to score cheap points. "Where are your colonies? Where is your empire? Where are your war banners?" The human breathed in once, slow and steady, like a swimmer measuring a shore. He did not lift his microphone. He did not defend. He did not list the places where human ships patrolled disaster lanes, or the hospitals they built in other flags' shadows, or the wars they refused because the bill was written in children's bones. He simply kept the smile. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't surrender. It was restraint. the kind that has joints and weight and memory. In the press gallery, a reporter from a RIM syndicate leaned toward her partner. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. "Feel what?" "Like the room has a hinge and someone is looking for the pin." Below, the speaker performed his ceremonial sigh. "We remind our esteemed human colleague," he let the word esteemed drop like a coin into a well, "that the council invites open exchange. If any remarks offend your sensibilities, you may rebut." The speaker's eyes were small, polished stones. The human lifted his mic with 2 fingers. The chamber leaned forward for the first time. "Thank you, honored speaker," he said. His voice was clear but quiet, the translator hardly needed. "I have enjoyed your hospitality. I will continue to do so." He lowered the mic again. A beat of silence. A puzzled murmur. Then the laughter returned, too loud, relief in it. "There, see, he is as tame as they say. He thanks after a slap. He bows after the shove." The elder with ash-colored skin did not laugh. He stared at the human's eyes and saw the mistake everyone was making. They weren't seeing eyes. They were seeing shutters. The creel rose fully, tasting the crowd. "Enjoy it quickly," he hissed. "We will discuss whether your species retains its committee vote. The council cannot be cluttered by pets." That word did it. Some lines are invisible until they are crossed, and then everyone wonders why they did not notice them painted on the floor. The laughter faltered. A few bodies turned half away, not wanting to be seen on the wrong side of a thing. The speaker lifted his staff, anxious now, and began to say something about decorum. The human ambassador raised his mic again. He did it gently, as if careful not to bruise the air. "We have a word," he said, "for what we try to be in rooms like this. Courteous." He smiled, and now the smile had history behind it. "Where I am from, courtesy is not weakness. It is a break. It is a hand on a door, holding it so it doesn't slam on fingers." A few delegates chuckled uneasily, unsure if they were part of the fingers. The human continued in the same calm tone, each word placed like a stone on clear water. "We make room for others. We let jokes land. We absorb. We practice patience because someone must. But patience is a mode, not a nature. A choice, not a chain. Do you understand?" The creel clacked his mandibles, but it sounded smaller now, like pebbles in a jar. The feathered matron fluttered and found her wings didn't rise quite as high. The plated rift beast's tail made no sound at all. A junior delegate, the translucent one who spoke in scent, released a nervous puff of sweet, which the translator did not bother to turn into words. "In the second ring." The elder exhaled. He touched his desk with 3 fingers, a silent benediction. "Be wise, be small." No one heard it. The human set his mic down and folded his hands again. He waited. The waiting did something to the room. It had done the same thing, in other rooms, on other days, across other histories. Pulled noise forward until it showed its seam. The speaker saw the seam and tried to stitch it. "Ambassador, the council acknowledges your cultural framing. We do not intend offense. Bold speech is our tradition." "Of course," the human said politely. "Traditions matter." He looked around the circle, not at the loudest delegates but at the quiet ones, the analysts, the clerks, the aides who filed the words. "So do consequences." The word consequences sounded ordinary when he said it, almost a kindness. It landed like gravity. A delegate who had sneered in the first minute now studied his own hands, confused at the tremor in his left. A camera drone drifted downward for a better shot and then drifted back up again without being told to, as if it had brushed a temperature it did not like. Far above the dome, in cold black where ships lounged like sleeping whales, something subtle shifted. No alarms. No sirens. No flashing threat frames. Just a sequence of handshakes reaching out along comm lanes, breadcrumbs opening into roads, roads into highways, highways into doors. It did not happen here. It happened everywhere else, quietly, politely. A dozen human monitors stopped pretending they weren't listening and started recording. A dozen patrols changed their patrol. The chamber knew none of that yet. It only knew that it could hear itself breathing. The Creel tried once more, because a certain kind of pride cannot tell the difference between a stage and a cliff. Consequences, he echoed. From whom? Your charity fleets? Your farmers with their seed kits? Your teachers with their patient little hands? The human's eyes did something then. They did not narrow. They did not flare. They simply stopped being windows and became mirrors. Several delegates, without meaning to, straightened in their seats. From us, he said softly. The same us who fix what you break and bury what you cannot look at. The same us you like to call when a station loses heat at midwinter, when your pirates will not take your calls, when a plague leaps ship walls and you remember, too late, that courtesy is also a door held open for doctors. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Do not mistake restraint for absence. Do not mistake quiet for consent. The speaker tapped his staff again, truly to call order this time. It sounded like a spoon on stone. No one laughed. The elder with ash skin bowed his head as if in prayer. The human ambassador looked at him, and there was a flicker of something like gratitude, or perhaps recognition. The glance we give someone who has seen the next page. Ambassador, the speaker said, words careful now. You suggest that your civilization has capacities we have not catalogued. I suggest, the human replied, that your catalogue is not the world. A murmur went through the benches, not derisive this time but low and unsettled, like the first hint of thunder behind hills. Someone whispered, do we know their ship numbers? Another asked, how far do their lanes reach now? Another, who are their allies when we are not watching? The room's temperature did not change, but bodies felt colder. A wall screen glitched, then steadied, a minor artifact of far-off traffic pretending to be nothing. The feathered matron gathered courage for a final jab. You still sit alone, she said. Tame and alone. The human tilted his head, not unkindly. We are never alone. He spoke it simply, and several aides who wore quiet headsets blinked in the same second, as if a new channel had whispered across their bones. The Creel tried to click again and could not keep the rhythm. His mandibles worked like a door that did not line up with its frame. Saturday. It was not surrender. It was gravity. The speaker cleared his throat and attempted the safe road. Let us close this session. We have much to discuss in committee. We will not be in committee, the human said, still courteous. We will be in motion. The speaker frowned. Motion. You prefer speeches to actions, the human answered, because speeches can be quoted and actions must be answered. He spread his hands a little, not a threat, an explanation. You invited us to sit. We Saturday. You invited us to be civil. We were. Now you invite us to pretend. We decline. A small sound traveled through the chamber. Nothing like laughter, nothing like applause. It was the sound of a room meeting a version of itself it did not enjoy. The hush you hear when a portrait's eyes move. The human stood, not abruptly. He gathered his paper, aligned the edges, slid it into a folder with the same care he had used to place his words. He inclined his head toward the speaker. Thank you for your hospitality. He turned to the rings, one by one, giving each circle a second of his gaze. In that second, each delegate felt as if an index had been placed on a page where their name was printed. He reached for the small silver pin on his lapel, touched it, then took his hand away. The gesture meant nothing to anyone who did not know it. It meant everything to everyone who did. Above the ceiling crystals, in the black domes of orbit, navigation lights turned just enough to show intent. No weapons spun up. No alarms screamed. Only trajectories adjusted, like chess pieces leaning downhill. The speaker began, Ambassador, surely, surely. The human agreed gently, and the way he said the single word made it impossible to finish the sentence without sounding like a person explaining gravity to a cliff. The elder in the second ring pushed his chair back and rose, old bones complaining, and bowed. A full, formal bow, the sort one gives to a guest who is also a judge. The motion rippled. Others rose, slowly, pretending they needed to stretch, pretending not to notice they were copying him. A few stayed seated out of stubbornness or stupidity, and already those few could feel the room mapping their faces for later. The human lifted his eyes to the gallery one last time. The reporters did not smile now. They did not whisper. They recorded. The students had stopped scratching notes and were watching with still hands. History lessons do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they stand, adjust a cuff, and leave the room. The human stepped away from the desk. Courteous mode had not exploded. It had not shattered. It had clicked off with the delicate sound of a latch. The chamber heard that sound everywhere, in the halt of a chuckle halfway up a throat, in the closing of a translator's filter, in the shift of a ship's tiny light. The human walked toward the door, calm as he had arrived, and the door sensors hurried to open for him. He paused with one hand on the threshold and, without turning, offered the final gift the council would receive that day. "You wanted proof," he said. "You will have it. Not here. Not loud. In the places that matter to you when you are not performing for each other." He stepped through, and the door sealed with a whisper. No one spoke for a full 10 breaths. Then the chamber erupted, not in laughter this time, but in frightened math. How many ports? Which routes? Whose markets would wake to discover inspections, embargoes, favors called, debts collected? Which ship captains, those reliable human captains, would reassign without explanation? And what would that do to winter supplies on the proud worlds that had just applauded a joke? The elder sat back down slowly and closed his eyes. He had seen wars start with drums and flags. He wondered what a war looked like when it started with courtesy ending. Above them, where cameras could not quite focus, something vast and polite turned its face toward work. The chamber did not calm after the human left his first words. Instead, the insults grew sharper, like blades tested against stone. Delegates leaned forward, their voices laced with pride and venom, eager to push further, to test the limits of the human's patience. A feathered matron spread her wings wide, her eyes gleaming with contempt. "Tell us, human," she mocked, "why do your people refuse conquest? Do you lack the courage, or do you lack the claws?" Laughter rippled through the chamber, hollow and cruel. The human ambassador's face did not change. He lifted a small glass of water, sipped politely, and set it back down. That calmness, instead of reassuring, unsettled those who watched closely. It was as though he had heard a child insult him in a playground and decided it was not worth bending down to answer. The Creel delegate slammed his clawed hands on the desk, sparks flying as he demanded, "Answer us, pray. If you are not weak, then why do you hide behind courtesy? Why do you bow while others rise?" His mandibles clicked in delight as the chamber erupted in another wave of laughter. Yet the laughter felt forced this time, less like joy, more like a group trying to convince itself of its own superiority. The human merely smiled, his eyes glinting faintly as though measuring every word spoken. He adjusted his notes, aligning them neatly, and waited. In the second ring, a younger delegate snickered and called out, "Perhaps they are afraid to bleed. Perhaps they fear that a single war would erase their fragile world." Others shouted in agreement, voices rising into a cruel chorus. "Yes, afraid of blood. Afraid of stars. Afraid of us." Each insult carried less weight than the one before, but still they flung them like arrows at the silent figure in the center. The human remained still, his composure so perfect it began to gnaw at the chamber. Finally, a reptilian delegate with gleaming silver scales leaned forward, his tongue flickering with disdain. "If your species were to vanish tomorrow, who would notice? You have no empire. You have no colonies. You have no fleets worth naming. You have only words." He hissed the last phrase with relish. Soft, polite words. And words cannot win wars. The chamber broke into thunderous laughter again, but this time the sound faltered at the edges, because the human finally moved. He lifted his gaze slowly, sweeping across the room, and for the first time in the session, he let the smile fade just slightly. His eyes locked on the silver-scaled delegate, holding his stare until the alien shifted uncomfortably in his seat, though he tried to mask it with a sneer. The human leaned forward just enough for the microphone to catch his words. "You misunderstand," he said softly. "Courtesy is not fear. It is discipline. It is the choice to withhold when you could strike. It is the strength to sit while others bark. His tone was calm, his words simple, but in the silence that followed, they rang heavier than any insult. A few delegates stiffened, and for the first time, no one laughed. The Creel tried to recover the mood. He stood again, claws clicking, forcing his voice to rise above the uneasy silence. "Empty phrases," he snapped. "Show us strength if you have it. Prove to the council that humanity deserves even this seat. Or admit what we already know, that you are nothing but tame creatures, hiding behind smiles." The human leaned back, folding his hands again, his voice still even. "Prove," he repeated. The word alone carried weight, like a stone dropped into deep water. "You think restraint is emptiness. You think patience is weakness. You think politeness means tame." His gaze swept the chamber once more, pausing on each delegate who had laughed the loudest. "And yet," he added, his voice soft but unyielding, "you keep testing the door to see if it opens. Do you truly wish to find out what lies behind it?" A hush fell. The arrogance of the council still burned, but beneath it, unease stirred. Even those who hated humans most felt a coldness in their throats. The elder with ash-colored skin closed his eyes, whispering so quietly only those near him could hear. "They are making the same mistake again. They cannot see it." But the chamber did not listen. The provocations would continue, because pride is often blindest when danger is closest. And the human ambassador, silent and steady, waited with the patience of a storm that had not yet chosen to break. The chamber carried an uneasy tension now, laughter still echoing but not as strong as before. The human ambassador had not raised his voice, had not shouted or threatened, yet his calm presence pressed on the delegates like a weight they could not shake. Most tried to ignore it, leaning further into mockery, their pride demanding the last word. But in the upper tiers, where the elder delegates sat, a different sound began to stir, whispers. A scaled elder with eyes dim from centuries of service leaned toward his neighbor. His voice was gravel, low, almost fearful. "Do you not remember the records? The last time a council dared to provoke them, whole fleets vanished." His neighbor, a feathered matron with fading plumage, stiffened, pretending not to hear, but her claws tapped nervously on the table. A few others nearby exchanged worried looks. They had lived long enough to recall ancient files sealed away in archives, records written in panic and desperation, warning of what could happen if humanity was cornered. Younger delegates scoffed, laughing louder to drown out the whispers. Old myths, one sneered, his golden horns gleaming. Stories meant to frighten hatchlings. Humans are soft. They do not conquer because they cannot conquer. Yet his words wavered slightly, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as the others. Across the chamber, another elder muttered, her voice sharp like dry leaves. "I was there. I saw it." Her words silenced the row around her. It was not myth. An empire mocked them. That empire no longer exists. The records were not exaggeration, they were warnings. Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned with memory. The chamber shifted. Laughter faltered again, replaced by murmurs that grew into nervous chatter. The younger ones rolled their eyes, insisting loudly that the stories were exaggerations, but unease gnawed at the edges of their certainty. A reptilian youth bared his teeth and said, "If they were so strong, where are their colonies now? Where are their empires? Where are their chains?" The elder who had spoken earlier turned her gaze to him, her pupils narrow slits. "Perhaps they chose not to chain others," she whispered. "Perhaps restraint was not weakness but decision." The human ambassador did not speak during these whispers. He sat silently, his hands folded neatly, his gaze steady on the council floor. He seemed to hear every word, yet gave no reaction, letting the whispers spread like cracks through stone. Some delegates began to fidget, their tails lashing or claws drumming nervously. The silence from the human had become more terrifying than any threat could be. It was as if they were all waiting for a storm they could not predict, wondering how much longer courtesy would last. One bold delegate tried to bring the chamber back under control. He stood and shouted, "Enough of these ghost stories. This is the present, not the past. Humanity has no fleets to frighten us, no colonies to command us. They sit here only because we permit it. His words rang loud, but fewer voices joined in his laughter. Too many remembered fragments of old records, the sudden disappearance of star systems, the burned wreckage of fleets no one claimed responsibility for, the silence left where powerful empires had once stood. The chamber split between arrogance and fear. On one side, the young and proud roared louder, insisting humans were weak. On the other, the older and wiser whispered warnings, urging caution, begging for restraint. In the center sat the human ambassador, silent, calm, his expression unreadable. He had not defended himself, had not denied the insults, had not confirmed the whispers. He only watched, as though measuring every breath, every reaction, every word spoken. And with every passing moment, the council grew more uneasy, because deep down, they knew the truth. Legends are not born from nothing. They had laughed at the old warnings for centuries, but now, face to face with a human who smiled politely through their mockery, they began to wonder if they had been laughing at their own funeral song all along. The chamber air grew heavier, the whispers of the elders clashing with the arrogant laughter of the young. For too long, the insults had flown like daggers, each one thrown harder, sharper, as if they wanted to pierce the calm mask of the human ambassador. And yet he remained seated, his posture straight, his hands folded, his expression unbroken, like stone carved from patience itself. This silence, this restraint, became unbearable for the council, as if every second that passed without reaction was a storm tightening its winds. Finally, a towering insectoid delegate slammed his spiked limb onto the table, sparks scattering as he screeched, "Enough of this charade. Answer us, human. Are you prey or predator? Speak, or admit your silence is weakness." The chamber roared in agreement, voices rising, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. They demanded a reaction, any reaction, to confirm their belief that humans were nothing but fragile animals hiding in politeness. But then it happened, the first shift. The human ambassador slowly raised his eyes, no longer letting them drift calmly across the room. His gaze locked on the insectoid, piercing and sharp, and for the first time, the weight of his presence pressed back against the entire chamber. The polite smile that had sat gently on his lips since the beginning was gone. What replaced it was not anger, but something colder, something harder, like the silence of a blade drawn but not yet swung. The room quieted in ripples. One by one, voices faltered, laughter choked off mid-breath, until the only sound left was the faint hum of the chamber's lights. The human ambassador leaned forward slightly, his voice low but cutting through the air with clarity. "You confuse patience with fear," he said. His words were simple, spoken in calm tones, but they struck like iron across the chamber. "You mistake courtesy for weakness. You think restraint means tame. But discipline is not emptiness. Restraint is not absence. It is control." A chill settled over the room. The elder delegates stiffened, their fears confirmed. The younger ones who had mocked so loudly before now shifted uneasily in their seats, their bravado shrinking under the weight of those words. The insectoid delegate tried to sneer, his mandibles clacking nervously, but even he could not hold the human's gaze for long. The ambassador let his silence linger again, but this time it was not the silence of passivity. It was the silence of a predator allowing prey one last chance to flee. Then he continued, his voice still calm, but now edged with steel. "Every insult you throw, every doubt you shout, you are not testing me. You are testing a choice. A choice my kind has made again and again, to remain courteous, to remain restrained, to remain polite." He leaned back, his hands folding once more, but his eyes never softened. "Do not mistake choice for lack of power. Do not mistake our refusal for inability. Polite mode, as you call it," he let the words hang, his tone measured and deliberate, "is not a default. It is a decision. And decisions can change." The chamber felt as though the very air had thinned. Some delegates shifted nervously in their seats, their earlier arrogance crumbling into unease. Others tried to laugh, but their voices cracked, hollow and weak. The elders whispered again, their tones sharp with urgency. They are warning us. They are warning us now. Stop this. End this before it is too late. But pride still held many in its grip, and their silence was drowned quickly by another voice that tried to reclaim control. Empty threats, shouted a reptilian with gleaming scales, though his voice lacked conviction. If you had strength, you would have shown it long ago. The ambassador turned his gaze to him, expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and that silence was more frightening than any shouted threat could ever be. It was the silence of a man holding back, the silence of someone who had already measured every outcome and found none of them favorable for the council. And when he finally spoke again, it was with words soft and plain, but dripping with certainty. Do you truly want to see what happens when courtesy ends? A shiver rippled through the chamber. Even the proudest voices faltered, their laughter stifled in their throats. For the first time, the council realized they had provoked not an animal to the edge of its cage, but something far more dangerous, a predator that had chosen to stay behind the bars, and was now deciding whether to step out. The chamber had grown quieter after the human's last words, but arrogance is a poison that does not die quickly. Some delegates trembled, some fell silent, but others refused to believe what their instincts were screaming. Pride is louder than wisdom, and pride demanded the final insult. A younger delegate with crimson scales rose, his voice sharp, trembling with both rage and insecurity. You speak as if you hold power, human, but your worlds are few, your fleets are small, and your species is scattered. You have no empire, no throne, no dominion. You are children playing at diplomacy, tolerated here only because we allow it. Do not mistake our patience for fear. The words echoed across the chamber, and for a moment there was silence. Then, slowly, the human ambassador's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something thinner, sharper, a line that carried no warmth. He placed his hands on the table, leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice was colder than the void between stars. Patience, he said, each syllable deliberate, is the only reason you still sit in this chamber. The air itself seemed to stop. The delegates froze, their hearts pounding, their scales and feathers prickling with unease. The ambassador no longer looked polite. He no longer looked restrained. His eyes were steel, his tone a blade, and the weight of centuries of human history pressed into the chamber. Do you know, he continued, his voice calm but merciless, how many times humanity has been insulted, invaded, underestimated? How many times we have been pushed and prodded, mocked and dismissed? And each time, the same mistake is made, the same arrogant belief that restraint means weakness, that courtesy means submission. His gaze swept the chamber slowly, and none could meet his eyes for long. Even the proud crimson-scaled youth shifted in his seat, his earlier bravado cracking. The ambassador's words rang louder, sharper now, carrying the edge of finality. You believe we are tame because we choose peace. You believe we are weak because we choose not to conquer. But you forget, choice is power. Restraint is power. And you have tested it too long. He paused, letting the silence press down like a weight on every chest in the room. When he spoke again, his voice dropped lower, colder, but every ear strained to hear. Polite mode, he said, almost whispering, is not permanent. It is not weakness. It is not fear. It is simply over. The last word struck the chamber like thunder. Delegates recoiled, some gasping, some whispering in alarm, others trying to suppress the fear that rippled through their bodies. The elders who had warned them earlier lowered their heads in grim acknowledgement. They had known this moment was coming, and now it had arrived. One of them whispered, "It has begun again." The younger ones, who had laughed the loudest before, now sat pale and still, their pride dissolving into dread. The ambassador did not shout. He did not raise his voice or pound the table. He didn't need to. His calm declaration carried more terror than 1,000 threats. Because for the first time, the council understood. The courtesy they had mocked was not humanity's nature, it was humanity's restraint. And that restraint had just ended. The chamber remained frozen, breaths shallow, eyes wide, as though the galaxy itself was holding still, waiting to see what humanity would do now that polite mode was no longer shielding them. The silence after the humans' words was suffocating, thick enough to press against the walls of the chamber. Every delegate sat rigid, their laughter dead, their arrogance suddenly brittle and fragile. They had pushed, they had mocked, they had tested, and now the mask of politeness had fallen away. The ambassador did not rush. He allowed the silence to weigh on them, allowed the fear to settle in their bones. Then, without raising his voice, he spoke again, his tone like steel wrapped in calm. You doubt our strength because we do not flaunt it. You think peace is proof of weakness. Very well. If you need proof, I will oblige. He lifted a single hand and tapped a discreet device on the table before him. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but the effect was immediate. The massive screens surrounding the chamber, usually filled with glowing charts and records, flickered once, then shifted. At first, the delegates saw only the dark void of space. Then the view widened, and shapes began to emerge, enormous silhouettes gliding out of the darkness. Gasps broke the silence as the images sharpened. Ships, not the fragile trade freighters and outdated cruisers they expected humanity to possess, but warships. Colossal human warships, bristling with weapons, hulls layered with armor that seemed to drink in the starlight. Dozens of them, then hundreds, sliding into formation with terrifying precision. Their size dwarfed anything the Council had ever fielded. Their silence was worse than a war cry. They did not broadcast threats, did not light their weapons. They simply arrived, one after another, until the void outside was filled with steel and fire. A delegate from the insectoid clans cried out, his mandibles clicking in panic. Impossible. They cannot build such a fleet, our intelligence said. He choked on his own words as another ship drifted into view, larger than any Council flagship, its engines glowing like suns. The ambassador sat quietly, his expression calm, as if this sight were nothing unusual. You thought we were children with toys, he said softly. You thought we were too tame to build teeth. You were wrong. Panic spread across the chamber. Delegates shouted over one another, some demanding explanations, others insisting it was an illusion. A feathered matron trembled as she whispered to no one in particular. They hid this, all this time. The ambassador raised one hand again, and the image shifted once more. This time, it showed not one system, but several. Council strongholds, border colonies, industrial hubs, all now surrounded by human fleets, each formation as vast as the one above them now. Gasps turned to screams. Some delegates stood in shock, others collapsed back into their chairs, their arrogance shattering completely. The younger ones who had mocked humanity fell pale and silent, their eyes wide with horror. We did not come to conquer, the ambassador continued, his tone never rising, never harsh. We came to build, to trade, to speak as equals. And yet you mocked. You insulted. You pushed. You demanded proof. He gestured toward the screens, his calm voice cutting deeper than any shout could have. This is proof. Polite mode is over. Restraint is ended. You wanted to see our strength. Now you will live with the knowledge of it. A reptilian delegate who had once sneered at the human tried to rise, but his legs gave way beneath him. This cannot be. No race builds in silence like this. No one hides fleets of this scale. The human turned his gaze to him, eyes like cold fire. No one but us. The silence that followed was broken only by the trembling breaths of the council members. No one laughed now. No one mocked. For the first time in centuries, the chamber felt the crushing weight of a power they had never accounted for, a storm that had always been waiting just beyond sight. And the human ambassador, calm and unshaken, let them sit in that terror, knowing it was only the beginning. The chamber was no longer filled with laughter, no longer filled with mockery or prideful boasts. Now it was filled with the sound of fear, quickened breaths, hushed whispers, claws tapping nervously on metal desks, feathers ruffling in panic. The massive screens still displayed humanity's fleets, row after row of warships stretching across multiple star systems, their presence silent but suffocating. For every delegate who had once jeered and scoffed, now there was only pale silence, the weight of realization pressing down on them. The insectoid who had demanded the human prove his strength curled his limbs tight, his mandibles clicking in fear as he muttered, "We cannot match this." No coalition, no fleet, no alliance could resist that scale. His words carried across the chamber like a death knell, and others began to echo it, their voices breaking. "They are everywhere. We never saw them. How did they build so much in silence?" The ambassador sat unmoving, his face calm, though his eyes were sharper now, cutting through every delegate that dared to meet his gaze. He did not need to raise his voice. The images above them did all the speaking. A feathered matron, once loud in her insults, now clutched her feathers tight, her voice trembling as she turned to the council floor. We must offer concessions. Perhaps they will accept tribute, or alliance, something to appease them before it is too late." Her suggestion sparked frantic debate. Some nodded eagerly, desperate to agree, desperate to escape the storm they had provoked. Others shook their heads, muttering about pride and dignity, but even their words carried no conviction. The weight of fear had broken their arrogance. The reptilian with silver scales, who had earlier mocked humanity's lack of colonies, now leaned forward with trembling hands. His voice cracked as he said, "We should beg mercy. There is no shame in survival. To resist would mean annihilation." Gasps and murmurs filled the chamber at his words, but no one dared laugh. No one dared scoff. The idea of begging humans for mercy no longer seemed unthinkable. It seemed inevitable. The ambassador finally moved. He leaned forward, his calm voice cutting through the chaos. "You see now," he said softly, "why restraint was a gift. Why courtesy was not weakness, but choice. We could have shown you this long ago, but we chose not to. We wanted peace. We wanted balance. But you mistook peace for fear. You mistook balance for weakness. And so you kept testing." His eyes scanned the chamber, lingering on each of the delegates who had hurled insults at him earlier. They could not meet his gaze now. They lowered their eyes, their claws, their feathers, their horns, their arrogance buried under the crushing weight of reality. "You thought you were mocking prey," he continued. "You thought you were prodding a creature too soft to bite. But in truth, you were measuring the patience of something that has always been far more dangerous than you believed. And now that patience is gone." A murmur of panic rippled across the chamber. Some delegates clutched their communication devices, already drafting desperate pleas to their governments. Others whispered prayers, begging their gods to spare them from humanity's wrath. The elder who had spoken earlier, the one who had warned that the council was making the same mistake again, finally rose. Her voice trembled but carried authority born from centuries of service. "We cannot undo what has been revealed," she said. "The fleets are real. The power is undeniable. Humanity's restraint has ended, and now we must decide whether this council continues to exist, or whether it burns by its own arrogance." The chamber erupted again, but this time it was no longer mockery or insults. It was fear, raw and desperate. Some cried for surrender, others for alliance, and still others simply trembled in silence. For the first time in memory, the Galactic Council was no longer the master of the chamber. The human ambassador was. And he sat calmly, letting their fear grow, knowing it was only the beginning of their reckoning. The chamber had become chaos held together by fear. Delegates argued in frantic whispers, some demanding surrender, others begging for negotiations. But no one dared insult the human anymore. The images of the massive fleets still hung above them, black silhouettes armed with firepower that could erase worlds. Yet, even with that terror on display, there were always those too blinded by pride to accept reality. A booming voice cut through the fear. An armored warlord from the Dracal Dominion rose to his feet, his scales glinting under the chamber's lights. His people were known for their brute strength, and arrogance ran through his bloodline like fire. He slammed his clawed fist onto the desk and snarled, "This is a show. Trickery. Smoke and shadows meant to scare the weak. I will not kneel to illusions." He bared his fangs and pointed at the human. "You claim strength, yet you sit here with words. Prove it, or admit you are nothing but deceivers." The chamber fell silent. Every eye darted between the human ambassador and the furious warlord. Many wanted to stop him, to silence him before he went too far, but no one moved. The challenge hung in the air, and everyone knew this was the moment that would decide whether humanity's threats were shadow or steel. The ambassador finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he pressed a finger against the device on his desk. The screen above shifted again, no longer showing fleets scattered across the galaxy but zooming in on a single system, the Dracal Dominion's central fleet yard. Massive warships, armed to the teeth, floated in formation, their weapons gleaming under artificial suns. Pride swelled on the warlord's face. "Yes," he growled. "Our fleets stand ready. Let your illusions try and match them." The ambassador's expression did not change. His eyes remained cold, his tone calm. "Watch." And then it happened. In an instant, the fleet yard erupted in sparks. One by one, the Dominion's mighty warships flickered, their engines sputtering into silence. Lights across their hulls dimmed, weapons froze, and entire vessels drifted helplessly as though their lifeblood had been drained in a single breath. The warlord's smug grin collapsed into horror. He staggered back, his scales dulling as he shouted into his communicator, but no response came. His fleet, the pride of his people, the source of his arrogance, had been disabled without a single shot fired. The ambassador's voice filled the silence. "Your weapons are nothing. Your fleets are nothing. When we choose to strike, we do not waste fire. We end the fight before it begins." He leaned forward, his voice still quiet, but now it carried the weight of judgment. "This was mercy. I could have ordered destruction. Instead, I chose silence. That is the difference between humanity and you. We do not revel in chaos, but we can end it when necessary." The chamber erupted, not in laughter, not in arguments, but in sheer panic. Delegates shouted, some trembling, some weeping openly. The sight of the Dominion's disabled fleet sent a chill through every heart. They realized it could be any of them next, that at any moment the human could snap his fingers and turn their warships into powerless husks. The once proud warlord slumped into his seat, broken, muttering curses that carried no strength. His people's pride had been shattered in front of the entire council. And still, the ambassador sat in calm silence, his expression unreadable, his voice steady as he delivered the final blow. "This is not conquest. This is not invasion. This is consequence. You demanded proof, and I have shown you. Now you understand what it means when polite mode ends." The fear in the chamber deepened into something heavier, a crushing certainty that the galaxy they had known no longer existed. The balance of power had shifted forever, and there was no going back. The chamber had fallen into a trembling silence. The image of the Dracal Dominion's disabled fleet still hovered above them, a cruel reminder of how quickly pride could collapse into nothingness. Delegates who once laughed now sat pale, their eyes wide, their bodies rigid with fear. Some whispered prayers, others gripped their desks as though the wood and metal could anchor them against the storm that had broken their illusion of power. The warlord who had shouted defiance sat slumped, his scales dull, his pride shattered, his voice nothing more than a broken rasp. The human ambassador let the silence linger. He let them feel the weight of their defeat, the truth of their helplessness. Then, slowly, he stood. The movement was simple, but it commanded the attention of every being in the chamber. His presence filled the air like gravity, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a judgment passed down by the stars themselves. "You have mocked. You have insulted. You have tested the patience of humanity for the last time." He swept his gaze across the room, pinning each delegate in place with the cold weight of his eyes. "You called us tame. You called us weak. You thought our restraint was emptiness. Now you know the truth. Courtesy was never weakness. It was a leash we placed upon ourselves. And you have seen what happens when that leash is removed." The chamber trembled with whispers, but none dared to speak loudly. The ambassador raised a hand, and the screens above shifted again. This time, they showed not fleets or disabled warships, but planets, council strongholds, colonies, trade hubs. Human fleets hovered above them in silence, not firing, not conquering, simply waiting. We could burn your worlds, he said, his voice cold but steady. We could erase your fleets. We could reduce this council to ashes before the next dawn. But that is not what we desire. Humanity does not seek slaves, or empires, or thrones. We seek balance. We seek respect. We seek recognition that courtesy is a choice, not a weakness. His words cut into the chamber, sharp as any blade. Some delegates lowered their heads, unable to meet his gaze. Others gripped their desks until their claws cracked. The weight of his terms hung over them like the silence before a verdict. Here are my terms, he continued. From this day forward, humanity will not be mocked in this chamber. We will not be treated as lesser, or dismissed as weak. When we speak, you will listen. When we act, you will acknowledge. When we choose restraint, you will understand it is a gift, not an obligation. His voice hardened, colder now, and his eyes burned as they swept across the room. If you cannot accept these terms, then the alternative is simple. We remove the restraint entirely. And when we do, there will be no council left to speak of. Panic spread again, murmurs rushing through the chamber like a current of dread. Some delegates shouted for agreement, desperate to avoid annihilation. Others sat frozen, unable to speak, paralyzed by the realization that their arrogance had led them here. The elder who had warned them earlier rose once more, her voice steady though her hands trembled. We have no choice, she said. Either we respect them, or we cease to exist. The verdict is already written. The only question is whether we survive to see tomorrow. Her words silenced the chamber. All eyes turned back to the human ambassador, waiting, trembling, knowing that their future hung on the mercy of the species they had mocked. And the ambassador, calm as ever, delivered the final words with icy certainty. The era of laughter is over. The era of courtesy by default is ended. From this day forward, you will remember that restraint is a gift humanity chooses to give. And you will pray we never again choose to take it away. The chamber sat frozen in silence, every delegate crushed beneath the weight of humanity's verdict. The chamber was drowned in silence, not the silence of dignity but the silence of fear. No delegate dared to speak now, no claw tapped against metal, no feather rustled in arrogance. The human ambassador's words still lingered in the air like a brand seared into the minds of every being present. The verdict had been given, and there was no appeal. For the first time in the council's long history, its members realized they were not the masters of the chamber, nor the arbiters of the galaxy's order. They were subjects, held in check not by chains but by the cold discipline of a species they had mocked for too long. Slowly, the ambassador gathered his papers, though he no longer needed them. He adjusted his jacket with deliberate calm, every movement echoing louder than any speech. His silence was more crushing than the most violent outburst could have been. With a measured step, he rose from his seat. The sound of his chair sliding back was enough to make delegates flinch, as though even that might carry consequence. He walked toward the great doors of the chamber, his back straight, his pace unhurried. No guards moved to stop him, no voices called after him. Every pair of eyes followed him, some filled with terror, others with shame. A few with the dawning horror of understanding. As he passed, the massive screens still glowed above, showing humanity's fleets encircling council systems. The ships did not fire. They did not move. They waited, silent and patient, as if reflecting the man who commanded the chamber without lifting a weapon. Just before the doors, the ambassador paused. He did not turn fully, only tilted his head slightly, his voice carrying across the hall with the weight of inevitability. Remember what you saw today. Remember what you provoked. Courtesy is a choice, not our nature. Pray we never withdraw it again. And then he left. The doors closed behind him with a resonant thud, and the sound seemed to echo forever in the hearts of those who remained. For a long time, no one spoke. Some delegates stared at the floor, others into empty air, their minds breaking under the realization of what had been revealed. The once proud Dracal warlord, whose fleet now drifted powerless, sat slumped like a broken statue, his claws limp at his side. The feathered matron who had mocked humans as soft covered her face, her feathers trembling. Even the young, who had once shouted the loudest, sat with their arrogance shattered, their eyes wide and hollow. Finally, the elder who had warned them before stood again, her voice hoarse but steady. It is over. The galaxy we knew has ended. A new order has begun, an order that will be remembered not because we chose it, but because humanity allowed it. Her words carried across the chamber, not as defiance but as truth. No one argued. No one mocked. No one denied it. Slowly, delegates began to file out, their movements subdued, their pride gone. They walked into a galaxy reshaped, a galaxy where humanity's fleets hung silent in the void, watching, waiting, a reminder of what it meant when polite mode was switched off. Outside, across the stars, rumors would spread like wildfire. Worlds would whisper of the day the council laughed at humans, and the laughter died in their throats. Armies would murmur of fleets that appeared without warning, strong enough to strangle empires in silence. And across the galaxy, every leader would remember the truth, that humanity had not revealed all of its power, only enough to teach a lesson. The lesson was clear, eternal, undeniable. Restraint was mercy. Politeness was a mask. And when that mask slipped, the galaxy trembled. Humanity had not conquered them with fire, but with fear deeper than conquest. The chamber doors closed, but their echo did not fade. It would live forever, marking the beginning of a new age, a human age, born not of ambition, but of patience pushed too far.